November 3rd, 1985, Miami Warehouse District. Pablo Escobar walked through those steel doors 3 hours late, still smiling like he owned the world. Griselda Blanco had been pacing for 90 minutes, her silver Desert Eagle never leaving her hand. Maria Santos stood in the shadows, wearing the face of Isabella Morales, watching two legends who trusted her completely. Neither knew she was DEA. Neither knew she'd been feeding information to both sides for 18 months. Neither knew that in 60 seconds, everything would change. Escobar set down the duffel bag. $2 million in cash. Blanco stepped forward. That's when she whispered 5 words that turned Maria's blood to ice water. I know who you are. The warehouse went dead silent. Maria's hand moved to her concealed Glock, but Blanco wasn't looking at her. She was staring directly at Escobar. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Maria's heartbeat hammered against her ribs as Blanco's words hung in the stale warehouse air. The Desert Eagle gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights, steady in Griselda's manicured grip. But the gun wasn't pointed at Maria. It was aimed squarely at Pablo Escobar's chest. Escobar's smile never wavered. Griselda, mi amor, what game are we playing tonight? No game. Blanco's voice carried the cold precision of a woman who'd orchestrated 300 kills. I know exactly who you are, Pablo. The question is, do you know who I am? Maria forced herself to breathe. 18 months of walking this razor's edge, feeding carefully crafted intelligence to both the DEA and the Medellin cartel, and she'd never seen Griselda like this. The woman was a predator, yes, but always calculated. Tonight felt different. Tonight felt personal. You're the Black Widow of Miami, Escobar said, taking a half-step closer to the duffel bag. The queen who built an empire while men played at being kings. But we're partners now, remember? Partners don't spy on partners. The words hit the warehouse like a gunshot. Maria's hand inched toward her concealed Glock, muscle memory screaming at her to draw, to move, to run. But Isabella Morales, her cover identity, her second skin, would stay loyal to Griselda. Isabella would wait for orders. Maria Santos, the DEA operative, wanted to survive. Escobar's laugh was warm honey over broken glass. Ah, Griselda. Paranoia is the tax we pay for success, no? If I wanted to spy on you, would I bring $2 million in good faith? You would if you thought it would buy you my distribution network. Blanco stepped closer, the Desert Eagle never trembling. Tell me, Pablo, what did your people find when they searched my warehouses last week? I don't know what you... Warehouse 7. Shipping manifests. My suppliers' names. Each word came out like a blade. Someone gave you those locations. Someone with access to my private files. Maria's blood turned to mercury. Warehouse 7. She'd passed that intelligence to her DEA handler 3 weeks ago. Standard procedure, gather intel, verify product movements, build the case. But if Pablo's people had acted on information from an outside source... You think I betrayed you? Escobar's voice carried genuine surprise, but his eyes had gone dead. The kind of dead Maria recognized from 18 months in this world. The look of a man calculating how quickly he could kill everyone in the room. I think someone did. Griselda's gaze swept the warehouse, touching on Maria for just a heartbeat. Someone with access to both our operations. Someone playing all sides. The silence stretched like a held breath. Maria counted exits. 2 doors, both visible from where she stood. 3 windows, too high to reach without making noise. If this went sideways, her only play was to draw fast and hope 18 months of Griselda's trust would buy her a split second of hesitation. Perhaps, Escobar said slowly, we should ask Isabella. Every muscle in Maria's body turned to stone. The warehouse air suddenly felt thick as swamp water, pressing down on her lungs. Both cartel leaders turned to face her, and in that moment she wasn't sure if she was Isabella Morales or Maria Santos or just prey caught between 2 apex predators. Isabella has been with me for over a year, Griselda said. She's proven her loyalty. Loyalty can be flexible. Escobar's smile returned, but now it held teeth, especially when the price is right. The only price Isabella cares about is staying alive, Blanco replied. She knows what happens to people who cross me. Maria found her voice, channeling every ounce of Isabella's steel. Don Pablo, if you have something to say it directly. I'm saying someone leaked information about Warehouse 7, someone who had access to Griselda's files and my transportation schedules. Escobar picked up the duffel bag, not taking his eyes off her. Someone who could walk between our worlds without suspicion. The accusation hit like a physical blow. Maria felt sweat beating between her shoulder blades, but Isabella's mask held firm. And you think I'm playing both sides? I think, Escobar said, that someone in this room isn't who they pretend to be. Griselda laughed, a sound like breaking crystal. Pablo, you're more paranoid than I am. Isabella's clean. I've had her checked 6 ways to Sunday. Have you? Escobar set down the bag again, his movements deliberate. Because my sources say the DEA has someone deep inside your organization, someone who's been feeding them intelligence for over a year. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Maria's hand moved closer to her Glock, knowing that in the next 30 seconds, someone in this warehouse was going to die. She just prayed it wouldn't be her. The Desert Eagle's barrel caught the fluorescent light as Griselda shifted her stance, the weapon still trained on Escobar's chest. Maria's world contracted to the space between heartbeats, the metallic taste of fear coating her tongue, the warehouse's stale air burning her lungs, the weight of her concealed Glock pressing against her ribs like a promise she might never get to keep. Your sources, Griselda said, her voice carrying the silky menace of a blade drawn slowly from its sheath, have been feeding you fairy tales. Escobar's smile remained fixed, but Maria caught the micro-expression that flickered across his features, a tightening around his eyes that spoke of calculations being made, odds being weighed. She'd learned to read such tells during her 18 months in this world, where a misinterpreted glance could mean the difference between breathing and bleeding out on concrete. Perhaps, he said, reaching for the duffel bag with deliberate slowness, but fairy tales often contain more truth than we care to admit. Maria forced herself to maintain Isabella's posture, spine straight, chin raised in defiant loyalty to Griselda, but beneath the mask, her mind raced through possibilities. If Escobar's intelligence network had traced the Warehouse 7 leak back to someone in Griselda's inner circle, how long before that circle tightened around her throat? The DEA had promised her backup, extraction protocols, safety nets that felt gossamer thin in this moment suspended between accusation and violence. Truth, Griselda repeated, and Maria heard something new in her voice, a note of consideration that made her stomach lurch. Isabella, step closer. The command hit like electricity down Maria's spine. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but Isabella Morales would never show fear. Isabella was loyal unto death, had proven herself in blood and fire over the past year. Maria took 3 measured steps forward, close enough now to smell Griselda's perfume, Chanel No. 5 mixed with the metallic scent of gun oil. Tell me, querida, Griselda said, her dark eyes studying Maria's face with the intensity of a jeweler examining a potentially flawed diamond. What do you think of Pablo's concerns? The question was a minefield. Too quick to dismiss Escobar's accusations might seem defensive. Too ready to entertain them could appear disloyal. Maria channeled Isabella's calculated pragmatism. I think paranoia is a survival tool in our business. But I also think trust has to mean something, or we're all just animals eating each other. Escobar laughed, a sound like distant thunder. Philosophy from the muscle. How refreshing. Isabella isn't muscle, Griselda said, and Maria caught the proprietary edge in her voice. She's family. The word hit harder than Maria expected. 18 months of carefully constructed lies had created something she hadn't anticipated. Genuine emotion bleeding through the cracks of her cover identity. Griselda had trusted her with secrets, had brought her into the inner sanctum of one of the most feared criminal organizations in the Western Hemisphere, and Maria had repaid that trust by systematically betraying every confidence, cataloging every weakness, building a case that would eventually burn this world to the ground. The guilt was a luxury she couldn't afford. Not here, not now. Family, Escobar mused, can be the most dangerous betrayal of all. His words carried weight that seemed to press against Maria's chest. She thought of her handler, Agent Morrison, sitting in his climate-controlled office in downtown Miami, reviewing intelligence reports over coffee that never got cold. Morrison had never felt Griselda's hand on his shoulder, never heard her laugh at some private joke, never seen the flash of vulnerability that sometimes flickered behind her armor of calculated ruthlessness. Morrison had never called a cartel leader family and meant it, even for just a moment. The warehouse's fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows that seemed to shift with each subtle movement. Maria became hyper-aware of every detail, the way Escobar's fingers drummed against the duffel bag's leather handle, the slight tremor in Griselda's gun hand that spoke of adrenaline carefully controlled, the taste of her own pulse thick and copper-bright in her throat. "Isabella," Griselda said softly, "if someone in my organization was feeding information to the DEA, what would you do to them?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a fired gun. Maria felt the weight of both their gazes, felt the warehouse walls closing in like the chambers of a heart preparing to stop beating. Isabella's answer would seal someone's fate, maybe her own. "I'd make them wish they'd never learned to talk," Maria said, and the steadiness of her own voice surprised her. Griselda smiled, not the cold predator's grin Maria had witnessed so often, but something warmer, more genuine. "That's why you're family." But as Escobar's eyes narrowed, studying Maria with renewed interest, she realized that family might not be enough to save her, not if he already knew the truth. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire waiting to snap. Maria watched Escobar's fingers still their drumming against the duffel bag, the sudden quiet more unnerving than any threat he might have voiced. In the harsh fluorescent light, his face had taken on the quality of carved stone, beautiful and utterly merciless. "You know," he said, his voice carrying the conversational tone of a man discussing the weather, "I had dinner with someone interesting last week, a mutual acquaintance from Bogota." Griselda's gun hand didn't waver, but Maria caught the almost imperceptible shift in her stance. "Pablo, if you have something to say—" "Ricardo Moreno." The name fell from Escobar's lips like a stone into still water. "He sends his regards, Isabella." Maria's world tilted. Ricardo Moreno, the mid-level cartel financier she'd helped the DEA flip 6 months ago in exchange for his sister's safety. The man who'd fed them shipping manifests and payment schedules before disappearing into witness protection. The man who'd known Isabella Morales was asking too many questions about routes and suppliers. "Should that name mean something to me?" Maria kept Isabella's voice level, but her pulse hammered against her throat like a trapped bird. Escobar reached into his jacket with deliberate slowness, his eyes never leaving Maria's face. Griselda tensed, the Desert Eagle's barrel tracking his movement, but he only withdrew a small digital camera. Ricardo had fascinating stories about his time in Miami, about conversations with a woman who claimed to represent Griselda's interests. The warehouse air felt thick as syrup. Maria forced herself to breathe as Escobar turned the camera's display toward them. The small screen showed a grainy photograph, surveillance footage from a restaurant in Little Havana. A woman with dark hair sitting across from Ricardo Moreno, leaning close in conversation. The woman looked exactly like Isabella Morales. "Interesting," Griselda said, but Maria heard the frost creeping into her voice. "When was this taken?" 3 days before Ricardo disappeared. Escobar's smile had returned, sharp as broken glass. The same week, the DEA raided 2 of his safe houses. Maria's mind raced through the timeline, searching for escape routes in her memory. The meeting with Ricardo had been sanctioned, a careful operation to turn him without exposing her cover. But if Escobar had surveillance footage, if he'd connected Ricardo's flip to Isabella's presence— "Pablo," she said, channeling every ounce of Isabella's calculating intelligence, "are you suggesting I had something to do with Ricardo's problems? Because last I checked, he was your supplier, not mine." "Last you checked?" Escobar's eyebrows rose. "How would you know anything about Ricardo's business relationships?" The question was a trap, and Maria had walked straight into it. Isabella should have no knowledge of Ricardo's connections to Escobar's operation. That intelligence had come through DEA channels, not through Griselda's organization. The slip felt like stepping off a cliff in the dark. "Because," Griselda said slowly, her voice deadly quiet, "I told her." Maria's eyes snapped to Griselda's face. The cartel leader was watching Escobar with the focused intensity of a snake preparing to strike, but there was something else in her expression, a calculation that made Maria's skin crawl. "You told her about my suppliers?" Escobar's conversational tone had vanished, replaced by something cold and lethal. "I told her what she needed to know to do her job." Griselda's smile was razor thin. "Isabella handles some of my external negotiations. Due diligence requires knowing who we're dealing with." The lie was perfect, delivered with such casual certainty that for a moment Maria almost believed it herself. But she caught the micro-expression that flickered across Griselda's features, a tightening around her eyes that spoke of suspicion held in careful check. Escobar studied the camera display for a long moment, then slipped it back into his jacket. Due diligence, of course. He picked up the duffel bag again, hefting its weight. "Tell me, Isabella, what did you and Ricardo discuss over dinner?" The warehouse walls seemed to close in another inch. Maria felt sweat beading between her shoulder blades, but Isabella's mask held firm. "Supply chain security, payment protocols, the same boring shit I discuss with all our external contacts." Boring. Escobar nodded thoughtfully. "Yes, I imagine it would be, especially for someone with your background." The word hung in the air like a death sentence. Maria's hand moved imperceptibly closer to her concealed Glock, every nerve in her body screaming danger. If Escobar knew about her DEA training, if he'd somehow penetrated Isabella's carefully constructed identity. "My background is an open book," she said. "Street kid from Medellin, worked my way up through determination and loyalty. Griselda can vouch for every detail." "Can she?" Escobar's gaze shifted between them. "Because according to my sources, Isabella Morales has been a very busy woman, meeting with government officials, asking detailed questions about operational security, showing remarkable interest in law enforcement procedures." The accusations hit like physical blows. Maria felt the careful architecture of her cover identity crumbling. 18 months of painstaking construction collapsing in real time. But it was Griselda's voice that finally shattered her world. "Show me the rest of the photographs, Pablo." Maria's blood turned to ice water in her veins. The rest of the photographs. The words echoed in the warehouse like gunshots, each syllable driving nails into the coffin of her cover identity. She watched Escobar's smile widen as he reached again into his jacket, the movement unhurried, almost ceremonial. "I was hoping you'd ask," he said. The camera emerged once more, but this time he held it like a weapon. Maria's mind fractured into competing voices. Isabella demanding she maintain the facade, Maria Santos calculating angles for a running firefight, and underneath both, a quiet voice whispering that 18 months of lies were about to collapse in the space between one heartbeat and the next. Griselda stepped closer, the Desert Eagle never wavering from Escobar's chest, but her attention fixed on the small screen. "Show me everything." Maria wanted to run. Every muscle fiber screamed at her to draw her weapon, put 2 rounds center mass in Escobar, 1 in Griselda, and pray she could reach the warehouse exit before backup arrived. But Isabella Morales would stand her ground. Isabella had nothing to hide. The first photograph made Maria's throat constrict. Surveillance footage from outside the federal building in downtown Miami, grainy black and white, but clear enough. A woman in a business suit walking up concrete steps, her profile unmistakably Isabella's. Consulting work, Maria heard herself say. Import licensing. Boring bureaucratic shit. At 10 p.m. on a Sunday? Escobar's thumb moved to the next image. Interesting business hours. Griselda's silence was more terrifying than any threat. Maria could feel the weight of her boss's attention like a physical pressure, studying every micro-expression, cataloging each defensive response. The woman who'd built an empire on reading people's secrets was turning that talent inward, examining the loyalty she'd taken for granted. The second photograph showed Isabella at a coffee shop in Coral Gables, sitting across from a man in a cheap suit. Agent Morrison, Maria's handler. The DEA logo on his briefcase was small but visible if you knew to look for it. "That man," Escobar said conversationally, "works for the Drug Enforcement Administration." The words landed like physical blows. Maria felt her carefully constructed world beginning to tilt, 18 months of cover identity bleeding away like water through cracked glass. But some desperate part of her brain kept functioning, kept fighting. So do a lot of people in Miami, she said. Half the city works for the government in some capacity. Doesn't mean, show her the rest, Pablo. Griselda's voice had gone flat, emotionless, the tone she used before ordering executions. Maria's hands trembled imperceptibly as Escobar cycled through more images. Isabella entering the DEA field office through a side entrance. Isabella in a parking garage, passing documents to Morrison. Isabella. The last photograph stopped her heart. It showed her at a payphone outside a grocery store in Hialeah, the one she'd used for emergency communications when her cover phone felt compromised. But the timestamp made her stomach lurch. Last Tuesday, 3 days ago, the night before the warehouse raid that had netted $2 million in cocaine and 17 arrests. Emergency protocols, she whispered, then caught herself. Isabella wouldn't know about emergency protocols. What was that, querida? Griselda's voice carried the silky menace of a blade being drawn. I said. Maria's throat felt like sandpaper. I don't know what you want me to say. This proves nothing. But even as she spoke, she could see the careful distance Griselda was putting between them. The woman who'd called her family 5 minutes ago was now studying her like a specimen, calculating angles of betrayal. Escobar closed the camera with a soft click. It proves enough. The warehouse air felt thin, oxygen-starved. Maria counted exits again. Still 2 doors, still too far. Her Glock pressed against her ribs, 17 rounds plus 1 in the chamber. But even if she drew cleanly, even if she put down both cartel leaders, their security teams would turn her into hamburger before she reached the street. Isabella, Griselda said softly, look at me. Maria turned, meeting those dark eyes that had seen through politicians and rival dealers and federal prosecutors. Eyes that had read the souls of men before ordering their deaths. Eyes that now held no warmth, no familial affection, only the calculating appraisal of a predator studying wounded prey. Tell me the truth, Griselda continued, her voice barely above a whisper. Right now. Because lies won't save you anymore. The moment stretched like eternity. Maria felt the weight of 18 months of deception, of late-night conversations and shared dangers, and the twisted loyalty that had grown between them despite everything. Griselda had trusted her, had brought her into the inner circle of one of the most feared organizations in the Americas. And Maria had betrayed that trust with every report to Morrison, every piece of intelligence passed, every step closer to the inevitable day when federal agents would kick down doors and drag Griselda away in handcuffs. I'm exactly who I've always been, Maria said. Griselda smiled, cold, knowing, final. That's what I was afraid of. The Desert Eagle's hammer clicked back with mechanical precision, the sound echoing through the warehouse like the tolling of a funeral bell. Maria watched Griselda's fingers settle against the trigger, steady as stone, and felt time slow to the viscous crawl that preceded violence. 18 months, Griselda said, her voice carrying the weight of absolute judgment. 18 months of my secrets in your mouth, my plans in your reports, my trust wrapped around your lies like a noose. Escobar stepped back, positioning himself behind the cover of a concrete pillar, professional courtesy among predators, giving Griselda space for her execution. I'll leave you to handle family business. But Griselda's eyes never left Maria's face. No. Stay, Pablo. I want you to hear what she really is. The words sent ice through Maria's veins. There was something in Griselda's tone, not just betrayal and rage, but a deeper current of knowledge, as if the photographs had confirmed suspicions that had been growing in the dark for weeks. Isabella Morales, Griselda continued, each syllable precise as a scalpel cut. Street kid from Medellin, orphaned at 12, survived by selling information to whoever paid best. She tilted her head slightly, studying Maria like an entomologist examining a particularly fascinating insect. Except Isabella Morales died in a Bogotá gutter 3 years ago, heroin overdose. I should know, I had her body identified. The revelation hit Maria like a physical blow. Her cover identity, so carefully constructed by DEA intelligence, built on the foundation of a dead girl's history. A ghost wearing a corpse's credentials. But if Griselda had known all along, then who, Escobar asked quietly, have I been negotiating with? Griselda's smile was arctic. DEA agent Maria Santos, badge number 4471. 15 years with the Bureau. Specialist in deep cover operations. The gun never wavered. My sources in the Justice Department are very thorough. Maria felt her world implode. Not just her cover. Everything. Every carefully maintained firewall between her two lives, every protection she'd built around her real identity, shattered in the space of 3 sentences. If Griselda knew her badge number, her DEA record, "My daughter," Maria whispered, the words torn from her throat. Elena Santos, age 16. Griselda continued with clinical detachment. Coral Gables High School honor student, lives with her grandmother at 847 Valencia Street. Walks to school every morning at 7:15. The warehouse tilted around Maria, her baby girl, the child she'd held exactly twice in the past year to maintain operational security. Elena, who thought her mother worked for an import company, who believed the lies about business trips and overseas conferences. Elena, whose photograph lived in Maria's wallet next to Isabella's forged documents. You touch her, and You'll what? Griselda's laugh was like breaking glass. You're in no position to make threats, Agent Santos. But there was something else flickering behind Griselda's eyes now. Something that looked almost like pain. Did any of it matter? The conversations, the trust, the times I treated you like the daughter I never had? The question hung in the chemical-scented air, and Maria realized with horror that she couldn't give a clean answer. 18 months of lies had bred their own twisted truth. She had come to care for Griselda, not as Isabella playing a role, but as Maria Santos, the woman beneath the mask, had found herself genuinely moved by the older woman's rare moments of vulnerability, had felt protective of her in ways that had nothing to do with maintaining cover. It mattered, she said, and heard her own voice crack. God help me, it mattered. Griselda's finger tightened on the trigger, but Maria caught the slight tremor in her gun hand. 18 months of your reports. Do you know what happens to my organization when the DEA moves on all that intelligence? Maria knew, had written the operational assessments herself. Conservative estimates suggested 40% of Griselda's network would fall in the coordinated raids, hundreds of arrests, millions in seized assets. The careful empire Griselda had built over 20 years, systematically dismantled through Maria's betrayal. And your daughter walks to school at 7:15. Griselda continued, her voice soft as silk. Such a predictable schedule. Almost like she's waiting for someone to notice. The threat hit deeper than any physical torture. Maria felt something break inside her chest, some last barrier between her two selves crumbling. She was no longer Isabella or Agent Santos, just a mother facing the arithmetic of absolute loss. What do you want? Griselda's smile widened. I want you to call your handler. Agent Morrison, isn't it? I want you to feed him information, bad information, poisoned intelligence that will send federal agents into traps instead of raids. And if I refuse, then Elena Santos becomes a cautionary tale about the dangers of walking alone. The warehouse fell silent except for the fluorescent light's electric hum. Maria stared into the barrel of the Desert Eagle and saw her daughter's future balanced on the edge of a trigger pull. 16 years old, honor student, walking to school every morning with no idea her mother's sins were circling like vultures. Griselda's voice dropped to a whisper. Welcome to the family business, Agent Santos. Maria felt the weight of 15 years settling on her shoulders like lead. The warehouse walls seemed to pulse with each heartbeat as she stared into Griselda's triumphant smile. But something nagged at the edges of her consciousness, a detail that didn't fit the perfect trap closing around her. You've known for 18 months, Maria said slowly, her voice barely audible over the fluorescent hum. Known exactly who I was, my badge number, my real name, Elena's address. Griselda's smile faltered for just a fraction of a second. You could have killed me any time, Maria continued, pieces clicking into place with horrible clarity. Could have rolled up my entire operation, turned me months ago. She took a step forward despite the gun trained on her chest. But you didn't. Careful, Agent Santos. No, The revelation hit like lightning, illuminating corners of memory she'd kept deliberately dark. You needed me operational. Needed me reporting to Morrison. Maria's voice gained strength as the impossible truth crystallized. Because you weren't just using the intelligence I stole from you, you were using the intelligence I gave to them. Escobar's eyes narrowed. What is she talking about, Griselda? But Maria was already pulling threads, watching 18 months of carefully orchestrated deception unravel. The warehouse raids that netted your enemies, the safe house busts that eliminated your competition. Every piece of intelligence I passed to the DEA, it was all feeding your consolidation plan. Griselda's finger remained steady on the trigger, but something cold flickered across her features. You're grasping at Ricardo Moreno. Maria's voice cut through the warehouse air like a blade. You told me he was skimming from your operations. Told me to make contact, gather evidence. But he wasn't stealing from you, he was stealing from Escobar. The silence stretched taut as piano wire. Maria watched Escobar's face cycle through confusion, suspicion, and dawning rage. She pressed forward, each word a nail in Griselda's coffin. Every target I identified for the DEA was one of yours that you wanted eliminated. You've been using federal law enforcement as your personal assassination squad, clearing out rivals while keeping your own hands clean. Maria's laugh held no humor, and I hand-delivered them a decorated federal agent to legitimize the intelligence. Griselda, Escobar's voice carried winter in it. Is this true? Pablo. Don't listen to her desperate. The cocaine shipment you asked me to monitor last month, Maria continued, momentum building. The one where you needed exact timing for the harbor patrol schedules. I thought I was helping you avoid federal interdiction. But you wanted them to seize it, didn't you? Because it wasn't your product. Griselda's mask was cracking now, fury bleeding through the careful control. Shut your mouth. It was his. Maria turned to Escobar, seeing comprehension dawning in his dark eyes. She's been feeding your operations to federal agents through me, using my DEA access to eliminate your distribution network piece by piece. The Desert Eagle swung toward Escobar as he reached inside his jacket, but his laugh stopped her cold. Too late for that, querida. You think you can threaten... I think, Escobar said, producing not a weapon but a small recording device, that you just confessed to using a federal agent to destroy my operations. His smile was winter sharp. This conversation has been very educational. Griselda's world imploded in the space between heartbeats. The careful chess game she'd orchestrated for 18 months collapsed under the weight of her own arrogance. She'd been so focused on manipulating Maria, on savoring the moment of complete control, that she'd forgotten Pablo Escobar hadn't survived 20 years in the cocaine trade by trusting anyone completely. Pablo, you don't understand? I understand perfectly. His voice dropped to lethal quiet. You've been using my trust to feed my enemy's intelligence, using this DEA bitch to eliminate my people while protecting your own. The recording device disappeared back into his jacket. Did you really think I wouldn't eventually notice the pattern? Maria watched the power dynamics shift like tectonic plates. 18 months of carefully maintained deception crashing down around all three of them. But it was Griselda's next words that shattered everything Maria thought she knew about the woman who'd shaped her life for the past year and a half. You arrogant bastard, Griselda snarled, the gun swinging back toward Escobar. You think you can threaten me? I own half the federal judges in this state. I've got senators in my pocket and DEA supervisors on my payroll. Her voice rose to a shriek. I built this empire while you were still smuggling peniente marijuana. The admission hung in the chemical-scented air like a death sentence. Maria felt something fundamental shift in her understanding, not just of Griselda's operation, but of her own role in it. She hadn't been an undercover agent infiltrating a criminal organization. She'd been a weapon, carefully aimed and fired by a woman whose corruption ran deeper than anyone at the Bureau suspected. Elena's face flashed through her mind. 16 years old, walking to school every morning, trusting in a world her mother's lies had made infinitely more dangerous. The family business, Maria realized with sick clarity, had been claiming victims long before she'd ever heard Griselda Blanco's name. The warehouse fell silent except for the distant hum of Miami traffic and the fluorescent light's electric buzz. Maria stood frozen between two titans of the cocaine trade, watching 18 months of deception collapse into something far more terrifying than she'd ever imagined. Griselda's words echoed in the chemical-scented air: senators, judges, DEA supervisors. The corruption wasn't a side effect of the drug trade. It was the foundation. "My handler," Maria whispered, the words barely audible. "Morrison." Griselda's laugh was sharp as broken glass. "Agent Morrison has been very helpful over the years. Amazing how cooperative people become when you have photographs of them in certain compromising positions." The revelation hit like a physical blow. Every report Maria had filed, every piece of intelligence she'd gathered, had been filtered through a compromised system. She hadn't been infiltrating Griselda's organization. She'd been performing in a theater where everyone knew the script except her. Jesus Christ! Maria's legs felt unsteady. How long? Morrison? 5 years, since his gambling debts became unmanageable. Griselda's voice carried casual cruelty. "Your entire operation was designed to fail, querida. A decorated agent's tragic death in the line of duty would have closed the books on our relationship permanently." Escobar stepped forward, his earlier amusement replaced by cold calculation. "But plans change, don't they, Griselda? When opportunities present themselves." The recording device in his jacket felt like a loaded gun. Maria realized she was witnessing the endgame of a power struggle that had been years in the making. Griselda had overplayed her hand, revealed too much in her moment of triumph, and now Pablo Escobar held evidence that could destroy not just her operation, but half the federal law enforcement apparatus in South Florida. "What do you want, Pablo?" Griselda's voice had shed its earlier confidence, becoming something harder, more desperate. "What I've always wanted." His smile was arctic. "Miami, your distribution networks, your political connections." He gestured toward Maria. "And a federal agent who can provide legitimate intelligence instead of your carefully curated lies." Maria felt the weight of their attention like a physical presence. She was no longer Isabella Morales or Agent Santos. She was a resource to be claimed, a weapon to be wielded. But something else stirred in her chest. Something that had been building since Griselda first mentioned Elena's morning walk to school. "You're both insane if you think I'll help either of you." Griselda's laugh held no warmth. "Your daughter walks to school at 7:15, Agent Santos. That hasn't changed. And my organization," Escobar added softly, "has people in Coral Gables, too. People who understand the importance of family." The threats hung in the air like toxic smoke. Maria found herself trapped in a nightmare feedback loop where every move led to Elena's danger. Griselda's corruption had poisoned the very systems designed to protect them. Escobar's reach extended into every corner of their lives. And somewhere in the distance, a 16-year-old girl walked to school every morning, trusting in a world that had already sold her future to the highest bidder. "There's something you're both forgetting," Maria said, surprising herself with the steadiness of her voice. "Which is?" Griselda's finger tightened on the Desert Eagle's trigger. "I'm not just a federal agent." Maria's hand moved toward her concealed Glock with deliberate slowness. "I'm a mother, and you just made my daughter a target." The words carried a weight that seemed to alter the warehouse's atmosphere. Maria felt something fundamental shifting inside her. 18 months of careful compartmentalization cracking open. She'd spent so long being Isabella, being Agent Santos, being whatever role the situation demanded, that she'd almost forgotten the person beneath all the masks. But motherhood wasn't a role. It was bedrock truth, something that couldn't be compromised or negotiated or traded away for operational security. Elena existed beyond the reach of cover identities and federal badges, in a space where Maria's love burned clean and absolute. "You think threatening my child gives you power over me," she continued, her voice gaining strength. "But you've just given me clarity. Perfect, crystalline clarity about what matters." Griselda's eyes narrowed. "You're outnumbered, outgunned, and completely compromised. What exactly do you think you can—" "I think," Maria said, her fingers closing around the Glock's grip, "that neither of you understands what you're dealing with. You see, a federal agent caught between impossible choices. I see two people who just signed their own death warrants." The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the warehouse floor. In the distance, Miami continued its daily rhythm, unaware that the fate of its criminal underworld was being decided in a chemical-scented tomb. And somewhere in Coral Gables, a 16-year-old girl prepared for another day of school, still believing in a world where mothers came home and justice meant something. Maria Santos was about to teach them all the difference between compromise and surrender. The first shot came from Griselda's Desert Eagle, the muzzle flash lighting the warehouse like lightning. Maria was already moving. 15 years of tactical training overriding conscious thought as she rolled behind a steel support beam. The bullet sparked off concrete where she'd been standing, leaving her ears ringing and her heart hammering against her ribs. But she wasn't the same woman who'd walked into this warehouse an hour ago. That person had been caught between competing loyalties, paralyzed by impossible choices. This woman, this mother, moved with the clarity of absolute purpose. "You want to play?" Maria called out, drawing her Glock and checking the magazine. 15 rounds. Let's play." Escobar had taken cover behind a stack of chemical drums, his own weapon drawn. The recording device that had been his trump card was forgotten now, the warehouse transformed into something primal and violent. "Griselda, you magnificent bitch," he laughed. "Always knew it would end like this between us." "Should have killed you in Medellin," Griselda snarled, pivoting to track Maria's movement. "Should have listened when they said you were getting too ambitious." Maria used their focus on each other to advance, moving from cover to cover with predatory grace. These two monsters had built empires on blood and fear, had corrupted everything they touched. They'd threatened her daughter, her Elena, and turned that threat into the gravest mistake of their lives. She caught Escobar in profile as he leaned around the chemical drums, his attention fixed on Griselda's position. The shot took him center mass, spinning him around and sending his weapon clattering across the concrete floor. He looked down at the spreading crimson stain on his white shirt with something approaching surprise. "The DEA bitch has teeth," he gasped, sliding down against the drums. Griselda's head snapped around, fury and shock warring across her features. "You stupid girl. Do you have any idea what you've done?" "I'm protecting my daughter." Maria's voice carried the absolute certainty of mathematical truth, something you'll never understand. The Desert Eagle boomed again, chunks of concrete exploding from the support beam inches from Maria's head. But Griselda's anger was making her sloppy, emotional where she'd always been coldly precise. Maria had watched this woman orchestrate complex operations with surgical patience. Now that patience was gone, replaced by the desperate fury of someone watching their world collapse. Maria moved again, using Griselda's reload time to close the distance. 15 feet, 10, close enough to see the older woman's face clearly, the mask of maternal affection finally stripped away to reveal something calculating and predatory underneath. "You could have been my successor," Griselda said, her voice dropping to conversational levels despite the gun in her hand. "Could have inherited everything I built. Instead, you chose them, the system that will betray you the moment you're no longer useful. I chose my daughter." Maria's Glock never wavered from its target, something you wouldn't recognize if it slapped you in the face. For a moment, Griselda's expression shifted, revealing something that might have been pain. "You think I don't understand sacrifice? Everything I did to survive, to build something that would last. You were part of that legacy. I was a weapon you pointed at your enemies." The words came out harder than Maria intended. "Don't dress it up as love." Griselda's laugh was bitter as burned coffee. "And what do you think your precious DEA will do when they learn about Morrison? About the judges and senators? You think they'll thank you for exposing their corruption?" The question hit deeper than Maria expected. She saw the future stretching ahead, congressional investigations, shattered careers, a law enforcement system eating itself alive. Elena growing up in the shadow of her mother's revelations, marked forever by association with this moment. But that was Elena's choice to make as a woman, not a decision to be stolen from her as a child. "Maybe they will," Maria said. "Maybe they won't, but she'll be alive to see it." Griselda's face hardened. "You naive little..." The final gunshot echoed through the warehouse like thunder, cutting off whatever endearment Griselda had been about to voice. The Desert Eagle tumbled from her fingers as she staggered backward, looking down at the growing stain on her chest with something approaching wonder. "I really did care for you," she whispered, sliding down the wall to sit on the concrete floor. That wasn't part of the plan. Maria kept the Glock trained on her until the light faded from Griselda's eyes, until the woman who had shaped 18 months of her life became just another casualty in Miami's endless drug war. The warehouse fell silent except for the fluorescent light's electric hum and the distant sound of sirens. Someone had heard the gunshots and called it in. Maria looked at the two bodies, at the blood spreading across the concrete, and felt something fundamental settle in her chest. She was going home to her daughter. Everything else was just paperwork. The sirens grew louder as Maria holstered her weapon and walked toward the warehouse's rear exit. Her hands weren't shaking. That surprised her more than anything else. 18 months of living as Isabella Morales, of carefully constructed lies and impossible moral compromises, had ended with 2 bullets and the sudden clarity that comes from choosing what matters most. She thought about Elena, probably sitting in first period chemistry by now, annoyed that her mother had been distant lately, but attributing it to the usual parental mysteries. Elena had no idea that her survival had just been purchased with blood in a Miami warehouse, that her ordinary Tuesday morning had been shaped by violence she'd never know about. Maria preferred it that way. The recording device lay forgotten near Escobar's cooling corpse, evidence of corruption that would have destroyed careers and shattered public trust in the very institutions designed to protect people like her daughter. She left it there. Some truths were too dangerous for the light, too corrosive for a system already struggling to maintain its legitimacy. Let the dead keep their secrets. She was done being their messenger. The back alley smelled of garbage and rain, a sharp contrast to the chemical stench inside. Maria pulled out her cell phone, her real one, not the burner Isabella had carried, and dialed a number she'd memorized but never called. Internal Affairs, Agent Rodriguez. "This is Agent Maria Santos, badge number 2847. I need to report the death of Agent Morrison and request immediate protective custody for my family." Her voice was steady, professional, the tone of someone filing paperwork rather than ending a war. "Agent Santos, we've been looking for you. Your handler reported you missing 3 days ago." "My handler is dead." Maria walked toward the street, leaving the warehouse and everything it represented behind her. Killed by Griselda Blanco's organization during a compromised operation. "I'll need a full debrief, but first I need my daughter secured." 3 hours later, she sat in a sterile conference room at the Miami field office, watching Assistant Director Walsh review her preliminary statement. The same walls where she'd first received her assignment to infiltrate Blanco's operation, back when she'd believed in clean lines between good and evil, law and chaos. "This is going to be a shitstorm," Walsh said finally. Morrison compromised, judges on Blanco's payroll, senators taking money. Half of South Florida law enforcement is going to be under investigation. That's not my problem anymore. Maria's coffee had gone cold, but she didn't care. I fulfilled my assignment. Blanco's operation is finished. What you do with the intelligence I provided is up to you. Walsh studied her across the table. "You've changed, Santos. 18 months ago, you would have been demanding we pursue every lead, no matter the cost. 18 months ago, I didn't understand what the cost actually was." Maria thought of Elena's laugh, bright and uncomplicated, untouched by the weight of institutional betrayal. "I'd like to request a transfer, something administrative, domestic. After this operation, Santos, you're a legend. You could write your own ticket, organize crime, counter-terrorism, anything you want. I want to pick my daughter up from school every day." The words came out more forcefully than she'd intended. "I want to help her with homework and argue about curfews and worry about normal teenage problems. I want to be her mother instead of someone who occasionally visits between operations." Walsh's expression softened marginally. "The psychological evaluation will be mandatory. What you've been through..." "What I've been through is exactly what I signed up for." Maria stood, suddenly exhausted. "What I didn't sign up for was bringing it home with me. I won't do that to her, not anymore." That evening, Maria sat in her real living room for the first time in 18 months, watching Elena tackle calculus homework at the kitchen table. The safe house had been similar, same suburban comfort, same careful normalcy. But everything felt different now, authentic. The woman sitting here wasn't playing a role or maintaining a cover identity. She was simply Elena's mother, and that was enough. "You okay, Mom?" Elena looked up from her textbook, concern flickering across her features. "You seem different lately." "Work's been complicated," Maria said, which was perhaps the greatest understatement of her career. "But it's over now. I think I'm going to look for something with more normal hours." Elena grinned. "Does this mean you'll actually be around for dinner? Because I was starting to think you were having some kind of midlife crisis." Maria laughed, a real laugh, untainted by the careful calculations that had governed Isabella's every expression, something like that. "But I'm through it now." Later, after Elena had gone to bed, Maria stood on her back porch looking out at Coral Gables' quiet streets. Somewhere in the city, investigators were processing a warehouse crime scene. Federal prosecutors were preparing cases that would reshape Miami's power structure, and news outlets were beginning to catch wind of the biggest corruption scandal in South Florida history. None of that touched this moment, the simple peace of being home, of knowing her daughter slept safely upstairs, of having chosen love over duty and found herself whole rather than diminished. The war was over. The mother had won. Everything else was just paperwork.